Good morning, everyone. This is Suzanne Kelly, President and CEO of the Waukesha County Business Alliance. Welcome to our Reopening Waukesha County webinar. I think we couldn't have picked a more timely program to bring you today, and so we thank you for joining us. Before we get started, just a couple of logistics. If you are joining us online, you should be seeing the presentation up on your screen and the control panel. Through the control panel, you can select audio mode, raise hands, or ask questions. Right now, you're listening by default through your computer speakers. If you prefer to join us by phone, just select telephone in the audio pane and the dial-in information will be displayed. Please submit questions and comments in the questions portion of the control panel, and we will address as many as we can at the end of the program. If you're unsure how to use the question feature, feel free to email Amanda Payne. Her email should be in your chat box, and it's also apayne@waukesha.org. I'd like you to know that this webinar is being recorded, and everyone who registered will receive the recording at the email address that they used to register. So again, welcome, and we have a special guest that I'd like to introduce before our sponsors to help kick us off. So please welcome Waukesha County Executive Paul Farrow.
Good morning, Suzanne. Good morning, everyone. As usual, the Waukesha County Business Alliance is right on pace with what's going on across the county and across the state. As you all know, yesterday the Supreme Court ruled the Safer at Home order as unenforceable. We put out a statement in Waukesha County last night that we believe businesses know how to keep their employees, their customers, and the community safe. And we're going to partner with them just like we have all along. That means you guys are open for business. What we're asking you to remember, though, is that even though the Supreme Court ruled the order unenforceable, the COVID virus is still active, and it is still out here, and we still have to deal with it. From the Waukesha County perspective, that means as the county public health department, we will continue to watch the contact tracing. We will continue to provide testing with our public health providers and ensure the safety of those. Keep in mind, as we've always talked about on all the different things that we go through, the CDC guidelines are still some strong things that we have to keep in mind with the social distancing, washing your hands. And for us, the big one that we'll be focusing on is keeping those at-risk populations, our vulnerable people, away from the virus as much as possible. If that's keeping them quarantined at their homes, making sure if they've got to go out, if businesses still have special hours for those individuals, we want to make sure that we respect that and help them out as much as possible. This is going to be a weird time because with the Supreme Court ruling, you're already seeing that different counties are responding this in different ways. I know Milwaukee and Racine are looking to extend what they had in place for about another week. So bear with us as we move through. We are going to continue to make adjustments. There have been conversations around large group gatherings that we'll be working on to this morning and getting some more information out. I will try to keep you up to date as much as possible through the Business Alliance. If you have any specific questions regarding your organization or operations, feel free to reach out to us at countyexec@waukeshacounty.gov, and we will hopefully respond to you as quickly as we can. But with that, I think you're in for a great opportunity to figure out how to reopen successfully, safely, and make sure that we continue to be safe and be smart so that we can keep everything open in Waukesha County.
Thank you, Paul. And the Alliance looks forward to continuing to work with you to get the most timely information out to all the members of our business community. And thanks for all that you and your team are doing to keep our county safe. And now I'd like to introduce our presenting sponsors. We couldn't bring you programs like this without the support of our sponsors. So I'd like to introduce Brady Chuckle, President of Paul Davis Restoration, and Chad Holland, General Manager of Paul Davis Restoration. Welcome, gentlemen.
Yeah, good morning. Thank you.
Thanks
for having us, Suzanne and Waukesha County Business Alliance. Exciting to hear from Paul and kind of hear a little bit more about the direction that we're going. We are certainly excited to be in our new facility here in Waukesha County. So we're here and working safely, and it's exciting to be here and be a member of Waukesha County. We're proud to be able to provide an offensive attack against COVID-19. We are decontaminating businesses and facilities across the state and even the country. It's certainly gratifying part of our business to know that we've allowed many businesses to remain strong and operate during a difficult time. We also realize that our service requests are now for sure going to increase as many businesses will be returning to work. Also excited to kind of hear from the panelists as well as participants about their concerns regarding a safe workplace as we are evaluating our own as we staggered employment and as we re-entered our workplace. For many of us here, we've never left. So certainly you can call us with any questions along the way. We're happy to help. I think our contact information will be provided. So again, thank you for allowing us a few minutes to speak. I'll allow Chad Holland to talk to introduce a little bit of our concept and our process as he's been managing our efforts on these projects. So Chad, I'll let you kind of walk us through our process on these projects, and thanks again.
Great, thanks. As you can see, I'm at my home office today, which is shared with my kids' play space. So forgive me if a 3-year-old tackles me in just a couple minutes here, but I'll try to run through what we've been up to. Decontamination's been a service we've been doing for about 7 years now in southeastern Wisconsin. As of right now, it's at its highest peak, of course. We've been doing more decontamination and application of disinfectant than we have since H1N1 about 10, 12 years ago. So it is really busy right now. A lot of people concerned about what ifs, but also having a plan to get back to business. So we're doing both preventative and precautionary as well as reactive disinfection. Along with treating facilities and businesses, we also have to make sure that we're not bringing anything to those businesses. So we have our own protocols at our shop to make sure that we're protecting each other and not bringing anything into the building, as well as spreading it around to our customers. So we're constantly reminding our employees of the CDC guidelines, which are practicing good hygiene. When you're going to a customer's house, putting a mask on, putting shoe covers on, putting gloves on. All of those things not only keep yourself safe, they help prevent spread to others, but they also show your customers that you're being conscious about it and you care about them, and that goes a long way. Our services. So we've been doing this for quite some time. We have multiple certifications in trauma and biorecovery cleanup, which are actually higher standards of PPE than the CDC recommends or requires for COVID. But we want to treat every scenario we're in with our customers as if it was a positive case, because you just don't know. You don't know where people are, and that's the terrifying thing about this virus, I think, is that it spreads quickly, and you can't control what people do outside of your facility. So you just have to do your best to control it inside your facility. So all of our training has gotten us to the point where we're really doing something we were already doing in hospitals and businesses and homes and apartment buildings already. But now we're just applying this disinfectant for COVID. So big part of that is donning and doffing your PPE. If you don't do that appropriately, you're not only putting yourself at risk, you're putting the people inside that space at risk, because you're bringing something in from the outside, and you could also be bringing something out from the inside. So donning and doffing PPE is a huge part of what we do, and it keeps us safer than if you were to go to a grocery store. So it's a standard that we adhere to. So different techniques and cleaning methods that we have. Hand cleaning and hand cleaning is recommended by the CDC and the EPA. That is because you don't want to disinfect a surface that's not clean. You wouldn't be getting to your final surface. So hand cleaning in your facilities is going to be necessary. Most of you probably have a janitorial service. Just make sure they're using an appropriate chemical or disinfectant when they're doing that. And then applying a disinfectant afterwards can be in a manner like we do, which is atomizer or electrostatic sprayer, which really just makes the liquid into the finest size that we can get it to, so that it has maximum coverage, dwell time, efficacy, and it has a maximum kill count. So we do those two levels of cleaning. One is just come in and spray only. You're comfortable with your cleaning. And then one is we come in and do it all. And that's really what we're doing. If there is a case in places, we're coming in and just cleaning the whole space. For those just trying to get on a regular regimen, it's just an application of disinfectant. We're using a variety of products. Our top two most frequently used are the Rescue. It's a quat, very great, very good for a lot of large spaces. And then Decon 30 is very popular for occupied spaces, food, distribution, manufacturing, office spaces. We like to use Decon 30. Sorry. Any questions?
All right. Thank you so much, Paul Davis Restoration. Your services are going to be more important now than ever as businesses, more and more businesses start to open. And we are really excited to welcome you to the community as you open your new headquarters here, and look forward to continuing to work with you. We'll get all this information out to our membership and the people on this call, and if there are questions, we'll make sure to direct them to you. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And now I would like to introduce our panel today. We have Jeff Hoffman, principal at Cushman and Wakefield, the Berkey Company. And Jeff is also the incoming chair of the Alliance Board of Directors. Next up, we will have Ann Barry Hanneman, who is an attorney with Von Briesen and Roper, and also serves on the Alliance's Economic Development Policy Committee, where she's vice chair, as well as our policy board. Welcome, Ann.
Thank you.
And finally, Jeff Selinsky, Vice President of Insurance Operations at R&R Insurance. R&R Insurance is a highly engaged member of the Alliance, and Jack Reish, the co-owner there, is the current chair of the Alliance Board of Directors. So welcome, Jeff. Before we get started with the formal panel discussion, we're going to start with Ann to give us a quick update on yesterday's Wisconsin Supreme Court decision. As I said, we couldn't have picked a better time for this program. So I'll turn it over to you, Ann.
Terrific. Thank you, Suzanne. Maybe I should start out by thanking the Wisconsin Supreme Court. This is my first, Academy Award, but I couldn't have picked a better day to be on this panel with Jeff and Jeff in light of the Supreme Court ruling. We wanted to kick off this program just in light of this ruling to talk about, in general, what was decided. What does this mean? And does it impact, and to what extent, what we are doing as we look to reopen our businesses? As most of you are aware, the Wisconsin Supreme Court decided in a 4-3 ruling yesterday that the extended emergency order 28 is invalid, unenforceable, and the extension that was put in place by DHS was done so without the authority given under the law. I am a member of the Independent Business Association, and we participated in filing an amicus brief in this action. And when we look at what the narrow issue was that the Supreme Court decided, they looked at whether the Department of Health Services has the authority to extend the order in the manner it did. As you may recall, the extension was put into place following the initial emergency extension, which was invoked on March 12th. And with the authority given by the state statute and the Constitution, the Supreme Court determined that the extension exceeded the authority. That is not to say that health concerns are off the table. Certainly, as Paul emphasized, as we open our businesses, we need to be concerned about in what manner we are proceeding and taking steps to protect our employees. Simply because the extension is not enforceable, certainly that remains intact. Any other orders, as Paul alluded to, that may be put into place by municipalities or certain localities that may prohibit businesses from opening. So that is certainly one thing as we move forward in reopening and maintaining the safety of our employees during the pandemic. We need to be aware of what restrictions apply to us. Simply because emergency order 28 is off the table for the time being, we have other restrictions, and we'll be talking about those throughout the course of this program. But bear in mind that certain liability will be attached if we proceed without reasonable steps and safety protocols in place. One aspect of the ruling does focus on the question of who has the authority. The Supreme Court rendered their decision saying DHS did not have authority, and therefore any safer at home type restrictions need to go through the legislative process. So therefore, that authority is now under the administrative procedural rules given back to DHS and the legislature. One point that I wanted to bring out, and I think was very aptly said by the majority, that we trust that the legislature and POM have placed the interests of people in Wisconsin first and have been working together in good faith to establish the lawful rule that addresses COVID-19 and its devastating effects on the people, businesses, and other institutions in Wisconsin. So therefore, really where we are now is we expect more to come once those restrictions and rulemaking process goes into effect. And in all likelihood, we will see some type of phase-in restrictions that may be in place. Again, a little too early to tell right now, but we will see some sort of restrictions to be put in place. It certainly doesn't suggest that anarchy is the rule, certainly as we open our businesses, but again, we need to be aware of those changes that we expect to be implemented, and also any local municipalities where you may do business outside of Waukesha. As Paul Farrow indicated, Waukesha right now is letting businesses proceed as they see fit. He did touch on one thing that I think is important, and that will affect our businesses as well, in terms of, will there be any restrictions about gatherings of a certain amount? As we look, and we'll be talking today about conducting any type of conferences, any gatherings. We need to be cognizant of any local ordinances or rules that will be put in place during the pandemic. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jeff Hoffman to kick off our program as we intended before yesterday.
Thank you very much, Ann. And I think it was just announced within the last 30 minutes that Senator Fitzgerald, Assembly Leader of the Assembly Robin Vos, and the governor are all meeting already this morning to discuss a path forward for the state. So that's rather encouraging that we're actually having lawmakers do their job and sit down at the table and try to negotiate something on for the betterment of the entire state as a whole. So why I am here, I am principal in Cushman Wakefield, Berkey. We are a leading commercial real estate solutions firm in the state of Wisconsin. We are affiliated with Cushman Wakefield, which is a global leading commercial real estate services firm. And of relevance today, we have a leading market share in property management services in Asia and specifically China. So we here in the United States are roughly 6 to 8 weeks behind what occurred in China and Asia with the complete shutdown and gradual reopening. Our property management teams in China assisted over 10,000 businesses bring back more than 1 million employees, over 800 million square feet of space. So through that process, they were able to develop a fairly comprehensive playbook of what has worked for them in bringing people back to the workforce. That playbook is very robust. It's 34 pages in length. I think the Alliance has it posted on their website as a resource. There's certainly many different firms coming out with suggestions, checklists. I'm indifferent to what resource you use. The suggestion I hope you take away from today is, if you've not already put this plan in place, use the resources that are available to you to come up with a plan. The number one takeaway that I can stress in coming away from today and moving forward, we as business leaders and business people are naturally very optimistic people. We want to roll up our sleeves and get back to work. The reality of the situation is that the general public, your employees and your customers, still takes this extremely seriously. Last week, the Marquette Law poll came out that 70% of Wisconsinites still believe that safer order measures were important. This trickles down into your employees and your customers. So yes, in Waukesha County today, we can open our businesses, but if we open our businesses and we don't have customers and they don't feel safe, many small businesses will be better off remaining shut as opposed to operating at 25% capacity. So with that said, what we are going to try to do with the Cushman Wakefield material, the playbook, is we're going to break it down to the 6 basic steps called the Safe 6, the Workplace Readiness Essentials. We'll briefly touch upon some of the key areas in each different suggestion, and I'm very glad that I have Ann and Jeff to protect me here, both on the risk management and legal side, just to keep me out of trouble here. So what I can stress on this plan is that I would liken it to running a marathon. If you've ever ran a marathon or contemplated running one, you're a runner, you think of 26 miles and mentally you just can't comprehend that and suggest it's impossible. But if you consult with a good coach and read a good training program, what they will tell you is over a 4 to 5 month period, if you follow the training plan, you will be successful barring the unforeseen, such as an injury, you will be successful and you'll be able to complete the marathon. And I think this is very similar. What we're going to cover here today is not complex. It's not like we're trying to come up with a vaccine. You're going to probably, with most of you, you're going to say, yeah, that just intuitively makes sense to me. But it's going to be the discipline of implementing the practice, and this is going to be a consistent daily battle. We did not sign up for this when we started our year in January 1st. It was supposed to be a ho-hum 2% growth year. Yeah, there was going to be a presidential election, but the economy was roaring. Our biggest challenge was finding employees, and this happened, and we have to deal with it. And we are going to have to reconfigure the way we conduct business. I'd love to say that we're going to open up tomorrow and things are going to be where they were at on March 1st. That's not reality. The public takes this very seriously. And I think in a lot of these situations here, especially when we talk about workforce mobility and people working from home, my gut feel is that you are going to have a general uneasiness with a lot of consumers and employees coming to spaces that have a lot of people in them until we get to certain checkpoints, such as people going back out to baseball games, basketball games, the movie theaters, getting on a flight. Not necessarily is applicable here in Milwaukee, but if you have locations in major metropolitan areas, when people start taking public transportation, those are some of the markers that I'm going to look for to suggest that the public is back, the consumer is back. So I'm going to quickly walk through the next 6 steps, and then Jeff is going to discuss a topic that he wants the audience to really focus on as we progress through the different steps. But the steps are: number 1, preparing the building; number 2, preparing your workforce, which I think is the most important; 3 is controlling access; 4 is creating a social distancing plan; 5, reducing your touch points and increasing your cleaning; and number 6, the communication of what you are trying to achieve throughout your employee base. Next slide, please.
Great. Thank you for the handoff, Jeff. As Jeff indicated, what we really want to stress today is employee and workplace safety is critical. It does not become impacted by the decision that occurred in the Supreme Court last night. And what we want everybody to consider as we walk through the balance of the slides, both the slides that Jeff will comment on, and we'll have a series of slides, and I will as well. We want everyone to be able to be in a position to consider how you might implement the 3 techniques on this slide in your organization. Keeping your employees safe, keeping your customers that you have on premises safe, as well as any vendors or visitors you might welcome to the premises. So that evaluation will help you properly prepare your organization to manage the risk and slow the spread of COVID-19 as we progress. I'll come back to this slide later in my presentation. At this point, I'm going to hand it back to Jeff, and we'll start on the first of the frameworks we discussed earlier.
Excellent. Thanks, Jeff. Number 1, and Ann and Jeff, if you'd like to comment on any of these particular slides, please feel free to weigh in. I'd be very interested to hear your opinions on any of these particular matters. So preparing the building, this is a pretty basic one, and I think a pretty simple checklist type of event to complete. If you have been working remotely, or if you had a retail shop and you just have not been there for the last 8 to 10 weeks, even if you have been operating with a skeleton crew in your facility or place of business, one of the big things we are suggesting is working with your mechanical and HVAC techs and having your HVAC systems at a minimum serviced, replacing the filters, making sure the filtration of the air is running at its maximum efficiency. And you may even want to consult with your HVAC tech if there are certain systems that you might be able to invest in that can improve the airflow quality. That's really a big one. I'm going to go back to thank you for our sponsor, Paul Davis, in the introduction here. A thorough cleansing of the building. You might say, well, I haven't been in the building for 10 weeks. Why should I clean it? I think, again, getting back to that perception of bringing customers back in, it's a great checklist item to see. We thoroughly cleaned it. We would also really recommend, as you prepare the building, prepare the team that's going to be responsible for janitorial and cleaning. And that's going to vary on what your operation is, but I think a suggestion is, how did you used to do it? Was it outsourced to a janitorial services firm? Did you have somebody internal in your operations handling it? Make sure there is a point person who is responsible for the cleanliness. At a minimum, you should probably look at cleaning your facility once a day. And high use areas should be probably several times a day. And if you have a spontaneous event within your office and you assemble 15, 20 people, I know you're supposed to keep it under 10, but if you have a meeting of people, you might want to immediately disinfect it after that. So, Ann, Jeff, any comments on slide number 1?
I was just going to add, Jeff, with regard to getting feedback in engaging vendors in the back to work plan. Also, I know when we hit slide 2, we do talk about assuring worker safety. And I know some businesses have invited employees back to provide input as to what steps will be implemented. How do we prepare the building? What will we do for lunches, meetings? Are there any setups? I'm going to give a plug for Stands Fit for Your Feet, one of the WCBA members here in Brookfield. Andy Sajak was on TV last evening talking about preparedness, talking about what steps, engaging other stores, retail stores who retail shoes, what steps, no pun intended, they are taking to prepare their particular business and really customizing that. But I think getting the employees involved in that process really kind of, we go on to slide 2, but to reduce that anxiety that people know, number one, your business is concerned, and that is a top priority, as you both mentioned today, and as was covered by Paul Davis in the intro.
Excellent.
I would add to that, Ann and Jeff, as well. From a risk management perspective, it's important for all the business owners and all the members on the webinar today to not lose sight of we are in the midst of natural catastrophe season as well. So if you have facilities or you have properties that you haven't been to in weeks, very important, follow the guidelines that Jeff outlined for an interior inspection. If you have idle equipment inside, to also restart those with the proper specifications from the manufacturer so there isn't additional damage. On the outside, being mindful of wind, being mindful of water and how it's running off. If you haven't been to those facilities, we're right in the midst of when weather is going to be can be very destructive in our state and in our region. It's important to be prepared for that as well. Next slide.
And Jeff, at the end, I want to keep this specific to the workplace right now, but I want to talk to you too about preparing the building. That might be the financial side of coming back things. I'll talk to you about that at the end when we wrap up these slides. Next slide, please. Preparing your workforce, in my opinion, this is the most important task that you are going to have as a business leader if you have not already developed this plan. Whether you're doing it on your own accord or with your management team, this is perhaps going to be the most important thing that is going to set the stage for how your employees and customers are going to react to when you do reopen. I think there's 3 buckets of employees right now. 1, the people chomping at the bit to get back to work. 2, the people that are genuinely and legitimately concerned about the impacts of COVID. They just don't want to be in public. And I think we're in an environment where you have to respect that. And number 3, and I kind of fall into this mix. My wife and I have a 10 and an 8-year-old at home. So as much as I'm chomping at the bit to get back in the office, there are certain complications with the workforce that has children at home right now and trying to work around those. So as a manager, you have to take those 3 dynamics in your workforce and you have to try to come up with a plan that's going to work. I think a lot of the larger employers, especially on the technology side, you're starting to see policies being announced that if you can afford yourself, you have the technology and you're not dropping your productivity, work at home. Facebook just announced work at home policy to the end of the year. Twitter just came out and announced you can work remotely indefinitely. Now that may change again in the future, but I think what this crisis has brought forward in a lot of the operations, more professional office, I would say, and engineering that can work from home, we've all been able to survive and enhance our skill set working remotely, and I would expect that would continue on. One of the big recommendations that we are going to have here, and it may be counter to how we have operated businesses for many, many years, is we're doing this in our office. We are stressing, if you do not have to be to the office, do not come to the office. If you need to come to the office with your team and there's defined tasks, please come. We want you there. If you think your productivity is better, we want you there, but we don't want you there just to be there. We're going to get into that a little bit more on one of the next steps with the planning side of it. But what I would suggest is from your team, whoever is the champion of this project, if you're a small business owner, this is probably you. If you have an HR department, this is probably HR. If you have multiple facilities or a massive manufacturing plant, you probably have HR with a facilities manager that are coordinating this plan. That person, that team, it's their responsibility to execute this. This is their number one priority for the foreseeable future. Again, I go back to, we didn't design this role in the beginning of the year. We'd prefer not to focus on this, but to the point, if we don't have our employees and customers feeling safe about coming to our place of business, everything else part of our business plan is irrelevant at this point. I would consider the benefits of some of the teams that can work from home and some of the teams that you know need to be in the office, and I'd communicate with them. And Jeff, anything to add to this particular topic?
Jeff, just to echo how important communication is, and communicating that there is, if you can afford to do so, flexibility in that program, letting individuals who are able to work from home opt to do so. That will allow any vulnerable population, those individuals, like you say, who are very concerned about being out in public. Again, that'll bring them into the productivity if they can work from home. And certainly if there is an opportunity where, as the example you used, if there are limited occasions where you need to be in, come into the office, and assure that safety is the number one priority for anybody coming in. But if you can extend that flexibility, I think it's a great opportunity to do so. And I think the vast majority of the employees will appreciate that.
This is also an excellent time as we're preparing the workforce, which in many cases means educating them or re-educating them on policies to reinforce the importance of strong cybersecurity controls as well. I'll talk about that later in some additional slides, but you've probably all seen headlines around the cyber attacks are increasing in the business community all over the country. Phishing scams, lookalike email domains are all targeting employees now, and something that during this time, critical that we reinforce it and we check in on our employees to ensure that they're following the protocol that our IT partners have set up for us.
Excellent. Next slide, please, Heather. Controlling the access, this goes to the communication as part of your team that's developing the plan to bring people back to the office. You're going to really want to understand who is having access to the building at what time. As an example, with our firm, we have 37 employees. We have developed our plan to bring everybody back to the office. Initially, we were going to try to keep it to no more than a third of the workforce at one time. We came to a conclusion that that wasn't fair to people that had to be there. But what we are suggesting is communication. If you know that your team has to be at that office, we are instructing to communicate through our HR director to say, my team of 5 people needs to be in the office from 9 a.m. on Monday to noon. We are going to be occupying a conference room. That is part of controlling the access. If you are a warehousing manufacturer and you have multiple shipments coming in and out, we would suggest try to define what that plan looks like, have a champion for that project who's in receiving, that is going to be working with FedEx, UPS on where those projects or those packages get delivered. You want to restrict access to people that are not essential to your business, and you're going to have a defined visitation policy. You really only want visitors if absolutely necessary. And part of this controlling access, and we're going to talk about PPE, the personal protective equipment. What processes are you going to be put in place? If you're a consumer-facing business, do you need face masks? Are you going to require face masks for your customers? Costco this week went to face masks. Are you going to put up plastic shields to protect your cashiers? Are you going to take temperatures as people come in? The more you layer over this, the more complex it gets. But again, it comes back to the safety component. I'll give you 2 examples. I took a tour of a manufacturing plant 2 weeks ago. They had thermal imaging already deployed to allow people onto the manufacturing floor. I had to stand behind it. I lit up green, which was safe. If I was 99 degrees or higher, I was red, and they wouldn't allow you in. My wife and I sent our children to Good Times Day Camp in Waukesha, a great Waukesha business over the summer. They are going to be having their business operational. They're certainly going to be changing the business model, going to be smaller groups of kids. But what reassured my wife and I of still signing them up for keeping them in the program was they are going to check the temperature of every child that gets dropped off in the morning. And if that child has a temperature, they're getting sent home right away. So that's just one of those additional steps. Yeah, it's an inconvenience for the business, but for my wife and I, it was a differentiator to still allow our children to participate in the program.
And your employees are going to be looking for those protections as well.
Yeah. Jeff, anything to add?
Yeah, just one small point. Everything that Jeff commented on is very critical. I would also emphasize the importance of accurate record keeping around who's coming in and leaving your facilities on a regular basis. Name a leader in your organization to collect and maintain those records and act as a resource for visitors on the facility grounds as well.
Yeah, and that's extremely important for the contact tracing component that we're not going to necessarily cover in this, but that's going to be a critical component to fighting this. Next slide.
Go ahead, Jeff.
No, you finished the thought.
No, I can touch on it later.
Okay.
That's good.
Creating a social distancing plan for when you do reopen. The standard that I think everybody has been instructed is 6 feet. I'd probably stick to that 6 foot standard. And this really, you layer into the communication of how you're bringing people back into the office, back into your place of business. Unfortunately, the trend in, especially in office buildings and amenities that a lot of even manufacturers are putting in their facilities, has been these condensed community type settings that encourage collaboration, right? So we've all invested heavily over the past 5 years in making our work environments really shine to attract and retain talent. Unfortunately, most of that investment is going to go unused over the next several months as we fight through this. Lobbies, cafeterias, lounges, and cube farms, those areas promote density of employees, which is what we're trying to avoid. So I would work through how your operations flow. If you're in an office or a production or a warehouse facility, try to map out the workflow for your facilities, and you are going to have to come up with ideas on how you space out different groups. A lot of this goes into the management of how you're bringing employees back in. There's been big suggestions on trying to run shifts, and again, that goes to the communication of Team A, you can be here Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Team B, we want you here Tuesday, Thursday. If you can operate that way, that's great. That'll help you out. But the social distancing plan goes back to the comment I made about our operations. We're strongly suggesting if you can do a task at home, stay at home and do the task at home. Do not come to the office. You don't need be. I would suggest on the retail side, the consumer, the business to consumer facing type business, County Executive Farrow referenced that Waukesha County is open. We are strongly suggesting the WEDC guidelines. WEDC has come up with some very good suggestions and recommendations on if you are a retail consumer-facing business on how to incorporate social distancing within your operations. And Jeff, anything to add?
No.
I would just add as well, from the perspective of working from home, or even if you're back in your facility but in a different workstation, the importance of ergonomic practices so we don't begin to breed or create additional workplace injuries over time will be very important. There are a number of places you can go for resources if you don't have those internally as well. Thank you. Next slide, please.
Heather, can we get next slide, please? There we go. Reducing the touch point and the increased cleaning, we touched upon that in the beginning. This is a daily checklist step of cleanliness. Whether you're working with a company like Paul Davis, you have a provider, or you're handling it in-house, what we would suggest is this is a daily checklist. I would set up the checklist so you have the accountability, whoever is responsible for this. What are the high usage areas? Do you have an elevator that's coming into your lobby? Do you have lunch break rooms, bathrooms in particular? You're going to want to make sure that you have an abundant supply of hand sanitizer, disinfectant wipes, paper towels. Keep those supplies available and ready. I think this is a pretty basic step. Again, focus on the high touch areas, the high traffic areas, and make sure you have appropriate inventory of hand sanitizer, soap, disinfectants, and wipes. And Jeff, anything to add?
Again, communication of what the expectations are really key when you hit the ground running. When
Yeah.
people, start coming back, you want to make sure, again, you control that access, as Jeff had mentioned earlier, and make sure that folks know what precautions need to be taken.
Posting and sharing the new protocol, very important.
Yep.
Next slide, please.
That leads us to our last slide, which is the communication piece. This is going to be, in my opinion, this is not okay, we're going to post the policies via email or just put it up on a piece of paper and we're going to forget about it. To be successful here, I'm going to go back to the marathon analogy. You have to commit to this on a daily basis to see this through. And the reality is, I'm hoping that as time goes along, we're going to get more and more and better data that this isn't as bad as everybody says. I don't know if that's the reality of the situation. The reality of the situation is until a vaccine is developed, if a vaccine is developed, this disease seems to be highly contagious and for certain populations, very lethal. The other suggestion is that this will follow a trend line of spiking back up again in the fall. So you can't let your foot off the gas on any of these steps. And I think on the communication piece, you're talking to your teams. Yes, you have to be fluid here on what you can and can't do. You're going to get feedback from your employees. You have to take into consideration. My belief, and I'd like Ann and Jeff's opinion on this, is when a policy is put in place, until you change course on the policy, I think it has to be zero tolerance with some of the key things. If you say our office is going to be mask wearing, everybody wears a mask, because you just don't want to create that environment where you feel like other people within the office don't have to play by this set of rules. It just sets a bad example as we're working through this. I think some of the downside risks of not working with these plans and communicating these plans, and again, I don't know the inner workings, but you're hearing some of these stories about the food processing facilities in particular, where you're having these breakouts in the plant. And what's happening is there's multiple infections, and now your business is shut down for a couple of weeks, plus the stigma of having your name of your business on the front page of a COVID outbreak. If you can do all this and you still can't control something happening, but I think the goal is, if you implement this plan, you are going to project to your employees and your customers that you take this seriously and that you're doing everything in your powers to project a safe environment.
I agree, Jeff. I had a couple of small business clients experience a situation where an individual came to work, had symptoms, was sent home, and on Monday morning found out they were hanging out when they were in isolation with another coworker. So that person now becomes exposed. And for a small operation, when you have individuals who are giving short shrift to the obligations and the expectations, that can be very impactful to your business. And making sure people do know what the rules are. I agree with you, Jeff. I think this is one of those situations where we can't over communicate enough, and we can't enforce enough. I have had individual clients who have experienced individuals who were not following some of these protocols and were disciplined as a result swiftly. And we would recommend that certainly these are important policies, and for the sake of not only any liability, but for setting the tone that this is a safe place to work, it is really critical to your operations as you get up and running and as you incorporate more folks on premises as time goes on. It's really, really important.
Agree completely. And what we've built into our culture here at R&R Insurance is this type of communication starts right at the top. From our president and owner, Ken Reish, from our executive team, when they're in the building, they're demonstrating these behaviors. They're using the tools and techniques that we put into place. And where we see a violation, as Ann indicated, we're talking to those employees quickly. We're coaching them on what the practice will be going forward and getting back to business.
Excellent. That wraps up the Safe 6. Again, this is the high-level overview. The full playbook is about 34 pages. Email me if you'd like that, or go to the Alliance website. And I'll stress, I don't care if you use our playbook or not, but get a playbook in place for your operation. Heather, could you go to the next slide? I want to touch upon one more issue that's occurring in the marketplace. I'm not an expert in this matter, but I've talked to several contacts in the supply chain and sourcing arena that I know. And PPE, you're hearing the stories emerge right now over the past couple months. I think one of the shocking episodes of this entire event has been the woeful inadequacy of the United States medical supply chain. There's going to be opportunities for a lot of companies as we advance through this to onshore some of this, but we've come to learn that most of our medical equipment and goods is sourced from overseas. There are news story after news story coming out, and this is what you would expect in a market where you have billions of federal dollars that are now flooding in. There was a Wall Street Journal article this week, a company, I believe in Carolina, that was awarded a $55 million contract from FEMA. They had no experience in sourcing masks, and he had a parent company in bankruptcy, yet FEMA gave him a $55 million contract. That company could not hit the delivery deadline for the masks. FEMA was able to cancel the contract, fortunately, but you're hearing story after story. So my suggestions on the PPE front: if you are a business that has a high use of PPE, use highly qualified and experienced suppliers and import professionals to support your purchases. Don't go on the internet, find the first person you see, and place vast amounts of orders for PPE. Another big challenge, and this is specific to that N95 mask, predominantly manufactured in China. I think I've read stories that 20% of these masks are coming back as legitimate. The vast majority of them aren't being delivered with the specifications that are required. This is an area that is rife with fraud right now and delivery timeframes. It is very difficult because the whole globe needs this stuff right now. If you have PPE needs and stocking inventory, you're going to have to understand who you're dealing with, on who you're ordering from, and the delivery timeframes that they're going to be able to execute upon. What has happened due to demand, PPE products right now are probably 5 to 6 times what they were pre-COVID, and air cargo just to get them here from Asia is 5 to 8 times what it was. The benefit and what is happening, and I reference this, local help is coming. WEDC is going to be deploying a virtual marketplace, hopefully this week, for a Wisconsin-based supply chain to deliver PPE. There's local companies that are getting involved. I know Husco has been involved in designing a new mask. So there's business opportunities out here for Wisconsin companies, and I'd suggest you work with WEDC to try to take advantage of those.
As we mentioned previously, that WEDC vetting process is a great benefit.
Yes. Even if you have to spend a little bit more money or keep it in Wisconsin, you just got the security of knowing who you're dealing with. All right, next slide. I think Ann's going to touch upon a few legal things.
Sure. I did just want to highlight a couple of these issues we have talked about previously, and Jeff, please feel free to join in as well. Couple of touch points when you're looking at bringing folks back. What type of screen are you going to provide for all employees? When we're looking at asymptomatic employees, I think everyone knows that the EEOC, we'll touch on a couple liability issues, but the EEOC has, during the pandemic, recognized that inquiries and examinations about health can be made concerning and narrowly in scope regarding asymptomatic employees. Do they have symptoms? And certainly, if they do have symptoms, indicate they need to go home. And in doing that process, maintaining confidentiality safeguards. As most of you are aware, the EEOC requires still that confidentiality be maintained, and that even when you're tracing back with an individual that may have symptoms, you are not to disclose the individual's name, but you can communicate to the extent you can in providing that information to employees. Just a note about handling refusals. My recommendation generally is if individuals fail to participate in either inquiries, temperature checks, etc., ask why. Is it a safety concern? Evaluate, is there a reasonable objection to what you're asking about before you indicate to the individual that we're not granting you access unless you complete this checklist. I have some clients that every day run through the symptoms with every employee. And depending upon, if you're in the construction setting, and you're interacting with other individuals, other companies, you're at a general contractor site, that is a safety precaution that is expected of other employers who are also occupying the same site. So you want to make sure you're carefully thinking through, is it, as Jeff described, is it going to be a temperature check for anybody who walks in? I do think having some type of well-communicated screening, make sure before your individuals come back, they know what that is going to be. They know what we're going to be asking. And again, I think Jeff's last point, that communicate with confidence, make sure you are clearly communicating and build that trust in your process in welcoming individuals back, because I think that is really critical for success as we reopen, particularly those businesses who are able to reopen in phases. Jeff, did you want to add something?
I would add simply identify your process, stick to it and keep it consistent. As conditions change in your environment and needs to be modified, do that and document it. And again, good record keeping practices in time like this are very important.
Yeah. And of course, any of that information that's derived doesn't go into the personnel file. It's kept in the medical file, consistent with the ADA requirements. Next slide. Couple of things that I wanted to remind folks about when we're looking at individuals who have symptoms or maybe suspected of being exposed to COVID. Look first too, if you're covered under the First Families Coronavirus Response Act, FFCRA, and whether there is any paid leave opportunity for that individual. We are required as businesses, if you have less than 500 employees, to provide that leave. And we want to make sure you've got the required poster, and you are looking at individuals whether they do have a qualifying reason. Remember, touchstone is it's got to be COVID-19 related. And again, that may cover an individual who has no childcare because of COVID, or an individual who, and this is important, who is symptomatic and seeking medical attention. remember that that is a criteria. The individual who is being sent home is not eligible for FFCRA pay unless they are seeking medical attention. Hopefully here in the area, we have testing and it's available. Individuals have access, but encourage those employees to go forward, get that test, and then assess that. And just a reminder for the tax credit under FFCRA, if your organization, for example, has a PPP loan and you're in the 8-week designation period, you can't be taking both credits. So an assessment will have to be made. So again, before we apply for those credits, we need to be looking and assuring, yes, we are free to apply for those credits. Again, avoid that double dipping. Other benefits, taking a look at what flexibility you have in your policies. If individuals are not coming to work during a period of time, if they're able to work at home, that's one thing. Wage and hour compliance. Again, if we're sending individuals home, if they're exempt, we have to comply with FLSA. And by not docking somebody who is exempt if they're working part of that day. Again, hourly employees are different, and making sure that we're sticking with our leave management program. If we are putting in special rules during the time to cover and to relax rules about leave, put that in your policy that this is a temporary change from our normal policy or regular policy during the pandemic, just so you're clearly communicating with employees that this is a time-sensitive benefit. Again, look at your policies, make sure your employees know what's covered, take away that fear that individuals may have of not being paid for a period of time. Normally, if it's COVID related absence and an individual is not able to work, unemployment compensation benefits are likely not going to be available for that individual. But again, that is going to be something that we can minimize fear on behalf of employees about not being paid for some time where they need to be away from work. So any other thoughts there, Jeff and Jeff?
I don't have any.
All right, next slide. And with regard to exposure or suspected exposure protocol, and that's where I was reserving my comments earlier, Jeff, when you were talking about tracing back. Make sure that you do have a good system in place. I think, Jeff, you mentioned that. I just last week had a situation with an employer calling me, call me back, it's an emergency. We just found out somebody on another floor has COVID. Okay, so what am I asking? Who is and was exposed to that individual? When were they last on your premises? As you suggested earlier, Jeff, keeping track of that list. It's easy when you're isolated in an office, but if you are in an office building, make sure you know who's coming and going. Also, ask any landlord if there is an individual who tests positive for COVID. When were they last in the building? Where were they last in the building? I think generally there is recognition that that's important information, and most individuals who share office space are normally apprised of that information right away. Again, I think Paul Davis did a nice job talking about cleaning and disinfection protocol. And again, what steps will we take if there is an outbreak or there is somebody who tests positive? Make sure the contact individuals are made known to any individual who's coming on premises, including your guests. Make sure that that contact reaches you immediately, so that if there is a need to trace back and alert those individuals without naming names, that can be done expeditiously. real important to making sure that, again, you're not one of those workplaces where there is a bit of an outbreak or any type of spike among your employee community. Next slide. And policies, I think, you know, one of the points I made earlier about the ruling from the Supreme Court is we still have to abide by CDC and OSHA guidelines. So it's real important that we become familiar, clearly communicate. If you could show the next slide, please. I think most of these we had touched on. And I think, you know, certainly face-to-face meetings, travel, make sure individuals know what your expectations are. This last point can't be overstated. If you're sick, stay home. How are you going to communicate that to individuals? Remind people when they enter the building, if you're not doing a checklist of symptoms, how are you going to communicate that to your employee group? Again, those reminders I think are real critical as we resume full-scale operations. Next slide.
And I didn't emphasize, or we didn't include that if you're sick, stay home, but that is a very, very important fact. I know Wisconsinites in particular have a strong work ethic to show up unless you're, you know, laid out with a 102-degree fever. But we're in an era right now that even if you think you have a casual cold and you're blowing your nose every 10 minutes, stay home and communicate that with your workplace of work.
Yeah, and again, I think, Jeff, you mentioned earlier, you know those CDC guidelines, know what the symptoms are. And if an individual does express, hey, I got this, but I think it's a cold, it's nothing to worry about, you know, take a careful look at that and make sure people know that. That should be a reminder almost every day to employees. You know, no program like this is complete without talking about business liability. And I know Jeff's got some good pointers from the insurance end, but this certainly is something that we will need to monitor. And, you know, these debates are happening all over concerning state and federal business protections, covering tort liability and civil liability protections. The Wisconsin Civil Justice Council and the U.S. Chamber have some great outlines of the issues that are critical to businesses to assure some protection and some safe harbor so that businesses will not be hit with lawsuits regarding any changes made in protocol. When we look at the Wisconsin Fair Employment Act, again, we're asking about symptoms. Just as the EEOC has relaxed its regulations, so too should other requirements in terms of anything that we're going to manage symptoms. If we're going to require certain hygiene protocols and discipline individuals who don't abide by it. I think, Jeff, you mentioned, and appropriately so, we need to make sure people are adhering to these protocols. And we need to act swiftly if we know people aren't, because I think that consistency is really going to be critical. Any other thoughts here? Okay, next slide. Health privacy protection, again, we're making inquiries about health status as a natural protection for our employees and our customers. Again, we need to take safeguards of that information and make sure that we are maintaining that as medical records as required. And again, seeking protection to make sure that individual information, for example, if it's related to tracing back, that there isn't a gotcha at the end of the day lawsuit for taking those precautions in the interest of safety. Again, these protocols will be hopefully in place throughout the period of the pandemic. Employment practices protection, I think, is obviously key and very important to protect against class actions relating to business travel, wage and hour issues, leave management. If there are protocols that are being put in place temporarily to and for the betterment of our employees, there should be some business protection there in place to safeguard against these unscrupulous lawyers who I don't know. But again, so we can go about our business with confidence. The next slide, here's my little disclaimer, folks. Remember, just as we kicked off the program today in talking about the Supreme Court ruling, that doesn't mean anarchy is in place, but we need to make sure we are doing all we can to make sure that we are not, our practices are not going to be viewed as negligent in the face of the pandemic or reckless in exposing our workers or customers to risk of protracting the COVID and not taking steps to stop the spread. So all important things, but keep in mind that even if there is protection adopted in on the state level and the federal level, it is not going to protect those who don't take reasonable safety precautions. I just want to echo Jeff's comment. His firm, that 34-page guide is a great resource. There's other resources as well, but make sure you are looking at those best practices and incorporating as many as you can for your business in order to make sure you are doing all you can to protect the safety of your employees. Jeff's up.
Great. Thank you, Ann, for those comments. And again, this would be a great opportunity to thank Suzanne and her team for putting on this fine event, and thanking our sponsor, Paul Davis. They've been fantastic, and for the leadership that County Executive Farrow has exhibited in the last several months has been outstanding. So thank you for that. Next slide, please. So we talked earlier about a number of strategies and a number of techniques that are going to help us slow the spread. The three items that you see on the slide here can really work in tandem and can be modified to fit your business or your operations as appropriate. And these techniques are really going to help us keep a safe workplace, keep our employees safe, and display confidence, whether it's to our employees or to our customers or visitors that are coming on site. And we talked a little earlier about monitoring daily temperatures. So that's a practice that we've adopted. It's consistent with CDC and EEOC guidelines for pandemic outbreaks. It's an accepted practice according to OSHA for low and medium risk businesses. So that begs the question, what business is mine? OSHA has some very precise information on where your business would fit. The high risk or very high risk businesses are really exactly what you'd think. Medical facilities and medical transport type operations, those in the funeral home or mortuary type businesses are high risk employees that they would have to adopt a higher level practice. But for self-monitoring, something that we do here at R&R, we have a no contact thermometer. We have a logging practice for our results, and it's executed on a daily basis. And it's really been well received in the employee population. Jeff Hoffman shared some incredible detail around the importance of face covers, and in particular N95 masks. So a lot of controversy today over the equipment coming to us from overseas and its adequacy. So following the practices that Jeff outlined earlier be outstanding. If we have to get inside of some of the recommendations that the CDC and OSHA are putting out, in particular, in a situation where we can't manage our workforce inside of a 6-foot barrier or excuse me, a 6-foot social distance, or have a physical barrier like a plexiglass shield in between us and a coworker, face covers can help supplement that. N95 masks even better. Also, you see many employers and others applying gloves and glasses and other personal protective equipment as necessary. The N95 mask, of course, when it's properly made and certified, will offer you a higher level of protection for your employees. But certainly a face mask or a face cover will do in a lower medium risk exposure. And also, you know, this is a topic on infectious disease plans that many of us probably have not had to consider in a long time, or perhaps ever. And very simply, you know, what we're asking, encouraging employers to do is understand the exposure that they have, assess their risk, whether it's in their retail environment, on their shop floor, or in their establishment, and make adjustments as necessary. We've probably shared dozens of preventative techniques that you can use, you know, today. That might be work from home, it might be physical barriers. Of course, PPE can play into the prevention phase of this as well. And simply being prepared. Jeff talked about the importance of lead times, and the equipment may not be available when you order it. Understand what you're going to use, how much you need, and how long it will take you to source that information will help a consistent, even flow of your infectious disease plan and employee safety plans as we go forward. And the response is critical. Goes without saying, leadership in your organizations have to be involved. They have to sign on and approve. Then it has to be educated, shared with your employees, communicated properly, and making sure they're executing upon it. So all of these techniques work in concert with everything that we've been talking about today. Next slide, please. Great. So I'll talk about a topic here that certainly has generated a number of headlines over the last several months, you know, really dating back to early March, and a very important topic in everyone's industry today, generating headlines, generating class action litigation, and really, in all honesty, in some points, putting business owners at odds with their insurance company, their insurance broker, their insurance agent. So important that we talk about this topic today. So we certainly understand the frustration that this event has caused for business owners, for legislatures. We understand there's also a strong desire for a solution, and I'll talk about some things that we're going to be looking at further down the road, or that at least being considered. And we also can't lose sight of the difficulty that business owners are facing when they receive a letter from their insurance carrier notifying them they do not have coverage in some cases, in many cases. So we'll talk through that. And if you look on the left side of the slide, it's really maybe the most important piece of this slide is a global pandemic is simply uninsurable. We've seen that with COVID-19, it bears no regard to boundary. It's in 180 plus countries. The economic impact it's had across the world here in the United States is virtually incalculable, and we also don't know when it's over. So those three attributes alone make it very difficult for a singular industry to step in and resolve these problems. Secondly, The contracts you've seen, whether it's in Washington and many other states, are talking about rewriting insurance contracts that are in place, already signed, already agreed to. And the concern that business owners have, of course, the concern that the insurance industry would have, of course, and Ann could probably talk about this as well. That's a non-starter for the industry if the contracts that we sign as business owners aren't going to be meaningful. Many state legislators are now talking about retroactive mandates of coverage, meaning we don't care what the policy says, we're going to order or we're going to legislate that insurance companies pay those claims. A lot of concern around that in many industries, including organizations like the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, many others, groups that understand the importance of a strong insurance industry is important to business, important to the success of business so we can continue to grow. On the right side of the slide, it just puts some estimates together that are available from some of the industry groups that are followed closely in the insurance industry. So if you'd look at just employers nationally, under 100 employees or less, the estimate is roughly $255 billion to $431 billion per month. Now, AM Best has come out with an estimate as well. They regulate insurance company financial strength a little bit lower than those numbers. If you add in all employers with employees of 500 or less, that number starts with a 5 or a 6, $500 or $600 billion per month. So the economic impact, goes without saying, is tremendous. The industry surplus right now in December of 2019, we ended the year, started 2020 with about $800 to $860 billion in surplus. Surplus, the amount of money insurance carriers are holding to pay claims over and above the premiums they'll collect today in this year. So these pandemic claims would essentially wipe out the insurance industry, could wipe out the surplus of the insurance industry in a period of months. So also important, we talked a little bit earlier about the importance of a strong insurance industry, and not to lose sight of that strength also helps us deal with fires, tornadoes, hurricanes, workers' compensation claims, general liability claims, as Ann very acutely counseled us on earlier. It's critical that these industries, business owners, associations in the insurance industry work together to find a solution. Next slide, please. So looking ahead, and I'll emphasize here that all of this is just discussion right now. There's nothing drafted, nothing on the table, nothing being voted on, but certainly a lot of discussion, and it's primarily taking two forms. So the economic stimulus approach on the left side, likely part of a phase 4, phase 5 plan would be there's a strong coalition forming between business owners and the insurance industry to try to deal with business continuity and funding a program that could step in a future pandemic, and I'll emphasize future. This will also be focused on employers and employees, and important that in the next phase of stimulus that'll help current employers and employees, the funds be targeted there. You've probably read some cities, some larger cities across the country throwing in a number of other items that have really very little to do with COVID-19 into some of these bills, and that's problematic. We want to get the funds into the hands of the employers and the employees so we can work through that. The second approach as well is really, you'll hear an acronym called PRIA, P-R-I-A, very much modeled after what took place after the 9/11 event. And that was simply another event where the insurance industry was concerned over its ability to backstop a loss of that scale. If you lend some scale to that, the insured losses around 9/11 were about $40 billion, and we lost around 3,000 lives in that terrible event. So we have the basis for a program, and there are a number of legislatures and a number of business groups that are working together to talk about how the insurance industry can participate and play a role, but also in the event of another terrible outbreak, such as we're seeing today, would have government funds behind it to support it, to ensure continuity in the economy and in our everyday lives. Next slide, please. And lastly, and I'll ask Jeff and Ann to jump in as well. I'll just hit on a couple of these. We talked about the importance of employee engagement and staying close to our staffs, making sure they have the confidence that we're running a safe operation. Very challenging these days to keep up with new OSHA requirements, new standards, government orders, county by county implementing different programs. So that's certainly going to be a challenge. And I will emphasize again, because we've certainly, in the business that we are in, insurance, seeing a tremendous uptick in cybercrime, cybersecurity. There's just a tremendous amount of activity in phishing, in scams, domains that are look-alike, that remarkably look like your supervisor's name, your owner's name, your colleague's name that you would just generally approve. Pay special attention to electronic funds transfers and social engineering. Work with your IT partners to make sure that those risks are really tight, because we've seen many businesses become targeted as we go forward. Jeff or Ann, anything you'd like to add to this slide as well?
Well, I think you're right about vulnerability with regard to people working from home. It is not as focused as in the business environment. You've got other dynamics at play, and it is an opportunity where individual employees may have their guard down. So I think your point about making sure, emphasizing those controls, reminding weekly what those protocols are, is a good step if individuals continue to work from home.
Yeah, Jeff and Ann, the only thing I'd add on here, and I know we're coming up on time here, but one of the comments to embrace the re-engage and restart and rebuild responsibly is if your business has been significantly impacted, work with your landlord, work with your mortgagor. If you have a legitimate claim and you can share and be very transparent with your financials, and more importantly, your solutions, what your plan looks like to survive this, I've found that a lot of landlords and a lot of lenders have been very, very workable. But if you just show up with a form letter saying, it's unprecedented times, please give me relief, most of that has been dismissed. So I found that most people are looking at this as we're all in this together, but be prepared. You may have to provide information that you normally would be very reluctant to provide.
And that would equally apply as well to some of the programs that are being discussed. Your insurance carrier, if you filed a business income loss claim, might ask for that information as well. So again, good record keeping practices will be required, and certainly there's a number of people in the organization here that can help with that if necessary.
Well, thank you. With that, I think we have run out of time. So unfortunately, we will not be able to take any questions, but we will get back to the individuals who submitted those questions after the program with the answers. I want to thank our terrific panelists for the wealth of information you shared today. Absolutely outstanding. It's a lot, and I think it will be extremely useful moving forward. I also would like to say again a big thank you to our sponsor, Paul Davis Restoration. A lot has changed in the last 24 hours, that is for sure. We are no longer under a statewide order to shelter at home. However, we all know that COVID-19 is still in our community. So as more and more businesses open, we all need to continue to be vigilant and follow safety practices and social distancing guidelines, and you've all touched upon that today. We at the Alliance are really committed to helping all of our businesses as we move forward on the road to reopening and recovery. And I want to thank you all again for helping us do that. With that, we will conclude the program. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today, and be safe, be vigilant, and be strong. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.